Hello, let us resume our discussion on the Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. In my previous discussion, I have mentioned some of the basic implications of Eliot's influence or the different kinds of influences that have been made by Eliot in his The Hollow Men. Now, in this particular discussion, I will begin with the formations of the epigraph. As we know that epigraph, this particular term is actually indicate to uh, the using of words and phrases and also some lines from the other texts to incorporate a kind of a relation and also to indicate the kind of a resolution that the poet or maybe the stories or essays actually propagate. Now, when we read this particular poem, that is the Hollow Men, we find that there are two epigraphs are there. The first epigraph is considered to be the epigraph to the section heading. As you can see here, it is the Mr. Courage, it is this particular term. And the second one is a penny for the old guy, that is the epigraph to the poem. Now, Monjujan actually, she is the editor of T.S. Eliot selected poems and a critical reading of the selected poems of T.S. Eliot. It is the Oxford edition publication. Manjujan writes that the words are spoken by, that is the Mr. Courage, he did. It is spoken by the African servant in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, when he reports Kurtz's death. In Heart of Darkness, the narrator Marlowe recounts his journey up the Congo River in images reminiscent of Dante's journey into Inferno. His mission is to rescue Courage, a European trader in ivory who has gone out to the Congo with the sham ideal of spreading the light of civilization. Kurtz sets himself up as a god among the Africans, extorts ivory from them, and surrenders to the dark primitive impulses within his own psyche, participating in unspeakable rites. At various moments in his journey, Marlowe encounters Europeans who seem to him to be hollow, and he thinks that Kurtz too is a hollow sham, hollow at the core. However, Kurtz's dying words, the horror, are interpreted by Marlowe as an affirmation. It's a kind of a moral victory, possibly a supreme moment of complete knowledge. In contrast to his own tepid skepticism, when he is faced with death, Kurtz's cry for Marlowe was the expression of some sort of belief. It had candor, it had conviction, it had a vibrating note of revolt in its whisper. It had the appalling face of a glimpsed truth. These have been made at the beginning of Penguin Books' Heart of Darkness. Now, what I can say here that Eliot is referring to these lines by Marlowe, that is Mr. Courage, he dead. These were the words that have been spoken by Marlowe to the wife of Mr. Courage. Why he is referring to that? Where is the particular reference to the Hollow Men? And how this particular epigraph to the section heading can also be related with the epigraph to the poem? As we see that the title of this particular poem, The Hollow Man, is somehow associated with the temperament of the typical 20th century personalities of England. That can be punned. It's kind of a punning that Eliot uses in the Westland. The W-A-S-T-E, West. It has to be associated with W-E-S-T, West. The West is at West. And somehow the typical form of hollowness, the spiritual aridity, the spiritual vacuum, the typical form of hollowness that is being present within can also be related with us, the people, the readers. Eliot is trying to indicate them. But somehow, whenever we think of Mr. Courage or Guy Fawkes of the second epigraph, they are the lost violent souls. I'll come to that later. To say something about the title of this particular poem, Manju Jain writes, Eliot explained in 1935 that he got the title of the poem by combining that of the Hollow Land, it was a romance by William Morris, and that of the Broken Men, a poem by Rudyard Kipling. He also acknowledged later that he could never have thought of this title but for Kipling's poem. The Broken Men depicts the predicament of Englishmen exiled to the colonies, loitering by the shore and waiting to communicate with passengers of ships from home. It may have inspired Eliot's dramatization of the Hollow Men gathered on the beach of the Tumid River that you will find in this particular poem in line number 57 to 60. The Hollow Men of the Eliot's poem and the Broken Men in Kipling's share a sense of failure and exile. Another particular source of the title is Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar in Act 4, Scene 2, where the phrase Hollow Men is used by Brutus when he learns that Cassius, who had persuaded him to join the conspiracy to assassinate Julius Caesar, is not as warm and friendly as he used to be. Brutus says, I'm reading from the text, when love begins to sicken and decay, it useth an enforced ceremony. There are no tricks in plain and simple faith, but hollow men, like horses hot at hand, make gallant show and promise of their mettle. But when they should endure the bloody spur, they fall their crests, and like deceitful jades, sink in the trial. Now, Brutus's speech is possibly alluded to as an ironic comment on Eliot's Hollow Men, who would use an enforced ceremony for worship, which is symptomatic of the sickening and decay of their love. But they are incapable of plain and simple faith, wherein lies their salvation. Hence, they resort to self-evasion, role-playing, and the duplicities of rhetoric, like so many of Eliot's protagonists, such as Prufrock, as you can find in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and Gerontian. Now, ultimately, the title, The Hollow Men, it can also be classified or associated with the Heart of Darkness by Conrad. Now, let us think about the epigraph to the poem, A Penny for the Old Guy. The epigraph refers, I'm again reading from Manju Jain's writing. The epigraph refers to the gunpowder plot of 1605. This was the name given to a conspiracy by certain English Catholics to blow up the Parliament. And also King James I, his queen, and his eldest son on 5th November 1605. The leader of the plot, Robert Catesby, and his co-conspirators, among them Guy Fawkes, were zealous Roman Catholics, angered by James's refusal to grant further religious toleration. After the death of Elizabeth, they had hoped for a more liberal regime. They apparently hoped that the confusion that would follow the murder of the king, his ministers, and the members of parliament would provide an opportunity for Catholics to take over the country. In the spring of 1605, the conspirators rented a cellar that extended under the palace at Westminster. There Fawkes concealed nearly 2 tons of gunpowder. Meanwhile, Francis Tresham, one of the conspirators, warned his Catholic brother-in-law, Lord Monteagle, not to attend Parliament on 5th November, and Monteagle warned the government of the plot. Fawkes was discovered in the cellar on the night of 4th and 5th November, and under torture he revealed the names of other conspirators. Catesby and 3 others were killed while resisting arrest, and the rest were tried and executed. In January 1606, Parliament established 5th November as a day of public thanksgiving. It continues to be known as Guy Fawkes' Day. The occasion is celebrated with bonfires, fireworks, and the carrying of guys, the homemade effigies of old clothes stuffed with paper, straw, and old rags through the streets. On the evening of Guy Fawkes' Day, the guy is burnt on top of a bonfire while fireworks are lit off. The epigraph is a version of the children's cry, a penny for the guy, when begging money to buy fireworks for the celebration of Guy Fawkes' Day. Children have to display the guy in order to collect money. Now, the burning of the effigy of Guy Fawkes is probably a survival of primitive fire festival which usually took place at the beginning of winter. Remember that Eliot was very much influenced by the anthropological works, and that's why the rituals and rites, the celebratory performances are always in the poems of T.S. Eliot. J.C. Weston's Rituals to Romance and also the Fraser's writing, it had a deep influence on Eliot. So ultimately, when Eliot is writing these things, you can find some anthropological references are always present. A straw effigy was burnt as a sacrificial victim to the vegetation spirit to ensure the renewal of life in spring, or as a scapegoat to rid the community of bad luck and bad weather. The celebration of Guy Fawkes' Day is also associated with the All Souls' Day, which falls on 2nd November. In the Roman Catholic Church, this is a day for commemorating the baptized Christians whose souls are believed to be in purgatory. Catholic doctrines holds that the prayers of the faithful on earth will help cleanse these souls of their sins. The office or service of the day is that of the dead. The feast was abolished in the Church of England at the Reformation, but has since been revived in Anglo-Catholic churches. Guy Fawkes, as Moody suggests, somehow became for England the representative figure in what survives of the November festival of the dead. The penny tribute is a relic of offering to the dead. So Eliot's epigraph functions at several levels. It obviously relates the hollow men of the poem with those of Heart of Darkness and with the stuffed effigy of Guy Fawkes. Yet there is a distinction between Guy Fawkes and Kurds, the lost, violent souls that have been mentioned by Eliot. They had at least exercised a choice, and the apathetic protagonists of the poem, the hollow men, who are perceived as mere effigies. An illuminating comment on the poems in Eliot's assertion in his essay on Baudelaire. Manjujan comments, she's quoting actually what Eliot's lines. Eliot wrote, "So far as we are human, what we do must be either evil or good. So far as we do evil and good, we are human. And it is better in a paradoxical way to do evil than to do nothing at least. We exist." There is obviously a particular kind of an indication that to do nothing is the perspective of the hollow man. And in case of hollow man, you cannot get any particular possibility of salvation. And salvation or cleansing of the soul is the primary motive that Eliot is always propagating. In a typical Westland, these hollow men, they are suffering from that particular kind of crisis. They do not get the apt references or the chances to cleanse their soul. They're standing beside a river Acheron or Acheron. Why? Because they cannot cross the river with direct eyes. I will come to that later when I will go with these particular lines of the text. There is possibly a theological pun, as Manjujan points, intended in the epigraph upon the old man, okay, or fallen human nature not regenerated by divine grace. It is also relevant is Lancelot Andrews' sermon of 5th November 1616 on the gunpowder treason, in which he spoke of the abortive plot whence came for those saved a new birth of prayer and praise to God. The epigraph would appear to mock the notion that the failure of the plot resulted in a new life of prayer and worship. It also parodies the primitive vegetation rituals of the burning of an effigy of the vegetation spirit as a sacrificial scapegoat. Mainly, I'm following Manju Jain's interpretations of this particular text. And then we can identify that the hollow men can also be classified and related, as I've already mentioned, that Eliot thought hollow men to be the ending part of the wasteland. So there must be some kind of references, some kind of link with the wasteland itself. So it is better for you if you know something about wasteland, if you go through wasteland, and then you are reading the hollow men. So fundamentally, we find that both these two terms, whether it is Mr. Kurge or the Guy Fawkes, they are the representative figures of the lost violent souls. They are not to be associated with the hollow men. And Eliot preferred the lost violent souls because they have the possibility, they have the chance for purgation, you see, cleansing of the soul. And this cleansing is needed. And by extension, you will find that Eliot is critiquing the hollow men as they are losing that particular temperament, they're lacking the temperament to cross the tumid river, to move into the purgatorio, that is Dantean purgatorio. Okay? And how these are associated with this particular poem, how these have been incorporated through the poems, to the lines of the poems, we will discuss in our next lectures. Stay attached, subscribe this channel. Thank you.